to West Country Wanderings and welcome to one in my canal series. Today I've just caught the train here to Bath Spa, which lies in B&NES, Bath and North East Somerset. You're probably thinking canal? It must be something to do with the Kennet and Avon Canal. Well, that's part of our story, but not the main focus. Today I'm going to catch a bus and walk to another canal, one that's no longer used. Yes, we're back on the Somerset Coal Canal for part 2 of the adventures, looking around and see what we can see around the village of Combe Hay. So I hope you can join me again here on West Country Wanderings so I can tell you some more about the Somerset Coal Canal. So this is the navigable River Avon here in Bath. So I've just come out the side of the station of Bath Spa Station. And this was made navigable around the early part of the 17th century, around about 1720, and it fits in nicely with our story, as does indeed this here, which is the entrance to the Kennet and Avon Canal. So this is the start of the K&A, bridge number 194, making its way across to the River Kennet and then joining up with the River Thames around about Reading. It was restored in the 80s and 90s, that's the 1980s and 1990s, and now obviously it's a fully navigable canal making its way into the southeast and heading towards London. But this plays a vital role in our story of the Somerset Coal Canal too, because they are linked. They came together around about the same time. But before I tell you more about that, what I need to do now is walk back towards the railway station and catch a bus towards Odddown, where there's a park and ride, and then I can walk down to Combe Hay. Now this here is a very photogenic location. That there is Thimble Mill, and this here is Widcombe Lock, the first lock on the K&A. There's a deeper lock just the other side of the road underpass, which I have showed on a previous video here about Bath, but not in my canal series. That story remains for another day. But yeah, wonderful spot here. It's almost like you've got an island here with this weeping willow tree and some ducks on it. I've just seen some swans there, but though it does say about avoiding feeding the swans in this area because of the bypass channel and the chance that the cygnets could get swept away down the channel, so I won't be doing that. Anyway, I'm going to head back now into the centre of Bath to catch a bus, and I'll see you down near the Somerset Coal Canal. I've now come away from the hustle and bustle of Bath, literally about a half a mile walk from the park and ride at Odddown there, to this beautiful little woodland. And shortly I'm going to make my descent, and there's a clue to going to be what we're going to be talking about later on the Somerset Coal Canal, down that track, and then we'll be veering off following the line of the canal and telling you lots of history about this particular area around Combe Hay and the Somerset Coal Canal. Our story starts in 1763. In that year, one James Lansdowne discovered a large seam of coal in the town of Radstock, just a few miles further to the south of where I currently am. Radstock fits in with our story as well. Previously in that area, it had been thought that the coal was very difficult to extract, but because there was such a large seam underneath and around the town, they decided to open a coal mine there, a colliery. Later that colliery was called Upper Radstock. Later on, in this part of Bath and North East Somerset, B&NES, further collieries were added at places like Timsbury, Poulton and Camerton, and thus the Somerset coalfields were born. However, opening up the Somerset coalfield presented a problem: how to get the coal to market. Well, one of the things that the city of Bath, obviously a famous city, a very wealthy city and populous city which had grown up in Roman times, if not indeed before, they wanted to get cheaper coal into that city to furnish the burgeoning factories and mills in the area. But how to get it from this part of Bath into the heart of the city itself? Now, the bus ride that I've just taken has come up a very, very steep hill, went through a place called Bear Flat, and then it continued to climb all the way up to Odd Down. When you're carrying coal and getting it to market, that's no easy thing to do. The people that ran the Somerset coalfields, however, also had a rival, and that was further over there, the South Wales coalfields, and they were importing coal from South Wales from, or through should I say, Bristol Channel and the then navigable River Avon, which meant they were paying a higher price for it. If they could utilise the coal that underlay the ground here, they could reduce the price of it for Bath and other areas as well. Now I know what you're thinking, that doesn't look like a canal tunnel, it looks a bit railway-like. Indeed it is. There's lots of springs in this area and I don't think I'm going to be able to get through there. You can make out the other side of it though, I think there's water sat in it. I'm going to have to shine a light and torch, we'll have a close look at that in a minute. This is part of our story though, because this came after the Somerset Coal Canal and it was a railway that ran to Camerton, joining up with the main line that heads out of Bath in the southerly direction towards Westbury at Limplystoke, well actually around Dundas area, and again that fits into our story to do with the Kennet and Avon Canal. But let's rewind a little bit before I talk about the railway and go back to the opening of the Somerset coalfields. So there's our railway bridge, or rather the footpath and culvert which goes underneath the railway embankment, and we're here on the Coal Canal Way at the moment, but I'm probably going to need to go up the embankment, cross over the former railway trackbed and make my descent. Now at this point here it is difficult to make out exactly where the Somerset Coal Canal was because of the aforementioned railway, which was built across a lot of the former Coal Canal route, but not the bit that we're going to see next. Now the earlier Monmouthshire Canal caused the Somerset Coal Canal colliery owners, that's mouthful isn't it, caused them to rethink and thinking maybe they could have a canal of their own to open up the markets in this area and further afield, and indeed that of course is what they did. By 1793 plans had stepped up and a committee had been formed looking at architects and canal engineering specialists. Well, there was one already in the area, one John Rennie, who was surveying the route of what was going to become the Kennet and Avon Canal, which was what we saw at the beginning of the video. He was just a few miles over in that direction, and they contacted him. No, they didn't ring him up, I don't know, it must have been post in those days, contacted his office and said, "Oi, can you come over here and have a look, see how I can build a canal?" That's pretty much what happened. And he came and had a look in this area to see where the best route of the canal would be to serve the needs of the collieries in this part of North East Somerset. I'm now standing on the trackbed of the former railway line that went to Camerton in that direction, down towards almost the basin, in fact just beyond the basin that we saw in Somerset Coal Canal video number 1, and behind the camera in the direction of the main line heading down towards Limpley Stoke. Now, after John Rennie had written his report, he recommended to the Somerset Coalfield colliery owners that they connect their canal, the Somerset Coal Canal, to his canal that he was building. At that time, I think it was called either the Grand Western, which is a bit confusing because of the later Grand Western further south in Devon. It was later, of course, renamed the Kennerton Avon Canal. He suggested connecting it where he was building his famous aqueduct at Dundas Aqueduct, which I have covered previously on another canal series video. And that is where the Somerset Coal Canal meets the Kennerton Avon Canal. But why did he suggest that? Why didn't he suggest a tunnel going through Odd Down and into the city of Bath, which of course would have been much shorter? Well, there was a couple of reasons for that. One of them would have been cost, of course, building a tunnel probably 1.5 miles long, very, very long canal tunnel. But also, he was thinking ahead, because it wasn't just the Bath markets that the coal needed to go to, but further afield. Now, his canal could bring the coal from the Somerset coalfield out of this area into Wiltshire and beyond. There was another canal, which we've also covered previously here on West Country Wanderings, of course, called the Wilts and Berks, and that was starting to open up as well. So by connecting to the Kennerton Avon, he could also access the Wilts and Berks and the Thames and Severn Canal as well. So heading into the Gloucestershire to serve the mills there, and also in an easterly direction to serve Wiltshire and beyond into London and the southeast. So here we have the remnants of the parapet of a bridge which carried this lane, minor lane, over the track bed of the Camerton railway line. It's closed in the 1950s, made famous of course by the Titfield Thunderbolt, and it was hereabouts there was also a line of the canal, but you can't make out any earthworks of the Somerset Coal Canal in this area because when the canal was built it largely destroyed it. So if you decide to explore the area of the Somerset Coal Canal Way, you have the pub here, the Wheat Shift, here in Combe Hay, which I think serves good food, and I think there's accommodation here as well. I love this old Somerset County Council finger post sign here. To the right we have Midford, which is 1.5 miles. We've covered Midford before, but on Ross Railway Walks the 2 tunnels way out of Bath, and No Through Road. Guess which way we're going? No Through Road. Now I've got an interesting bit here. We're following the Coal Canal Way, of course, but we're also following the limestone link which links up with the Cotswold Way, the village to the north of Bath, the name of which escapes me at the moment. Put it in below. And we also have a railway bridge, again crossing over the former railway track bed. Oh, and there's a vineyard off on the left as well. Now we get into the nitty gritty. In front of us is Kyson House, the name of which is an important part of our story, as I'll tell you in a minute. And just over the other side of that gate, although it is off the right of way, but I can show you, is one of the locks. Now I must emphasise that this lock here on the Somerset Coal Canal is on private property. We're probably about 25 metres now above the line of the railway track bed, the one that went to Camerton. So this is very, very clearly the line of the Somerset Coal Canal. But we should be able to catch up with some of the locks later. But that is not how this canal was first built. Remember I said Kyson House. Now, as you can see, there's very clearly no right of way, so if you come exploring, please don't go across trespassing on private land. But if you just picture that scene, because I'm going to be referring to again soon. And I think this field here is referred to as Kyson Field for a very good reason. Well, this here is just stunning. I've just come around the side of Rowley Farm. I know this has nothing to do with the canal, of course, but this is a summer wildflower meadow. It's a grade 1 meadow indeed, and it looks magnificent here in early June. Obviously we've had so much rain, hence why I couldn't go underneath the railway culvert there, which the footpath does, but I had to go up around the embankment as you saw. But this here is just wonderful. That's what happens when it rains a lot. It's a beautiful, beautiful valley here at Combe Hay. We're going to make our way through the meadow, but not along there. That's the limestone way. We're going to come off that now and then curve behind the camera down the gradient till we meet up again with the line of the Somerset Coal Canal. Well, before I head down there through that gate and following the line of the canal, I'm going to make this my first pit stop, I think, because it's just so beautiful here. Just have a cup of tea and a biscuit before we continue along the Coal Canal Way on the Somerset Coal Canal. We finally caught up with our canal bed properly. You can just make out a little bit of water there inside the bed of the canal, though it's difficult to film because there is so much vegetation. Everything here is of course very green and lush after all the heavy rainfall we had right from October of last year in 2023. But there's a beautiful spot. We've now come into Engine Wood. There's a clue there in the name, our story. Well, what I want to take you back to is when I showed you the first lock, not so much the lock, but the house that's next to it called Kyson House, and that field. Do you remember the first field that had flowers in it? Not the later one I was walking down, but the first one called Kyson Field. That's a really important part of our story, and I'll tell you about that now. On the 17th of April 1794, a royal assent was passed to construct the Kennet and Avon Canal and this, the Somerset Coal Canal, right here in North East Somerset, and link the two together. That was written in the Assent Act, and I'll just read you the first preamble to it now. An act for making and maintaining a navigable canal with certain railways, that's an important word, isn't it, and stone roads from several collieries in the county of Somerset to communicate with the intended, note the word intended, because of course at that point it hadn't yet been built, intended Kennet and Avon Canal in the parish of Bradford, that's Bradford-on-Avon of course, in the county of Wiltshire. 2 years later there was an amendment to that act because the route decided to diverge. Well, it wasn't decided, they decided to diverge it because they wanted to mitigate the need for a very long tunnel here at Combe Hay. There is a tunnel at Combe Hay, which I'll come on to later in today's video, but it's not a really long one, which they would have needed to build. So you had the canal starting off on a lower level where it meets the Kennet and Avon by Dundas Aqueduct there, coming along following the contour, and then it needs to get up to a higher level to penetrate the Somerset coalfield here. And this is the area we're in now, so we're coming up a level. Now for a canal to get up a level you need to do several things. But originally they didn't decide to go down the lock route, although we've seen the lock here today. That's not how this started. Messrs Jessup and Whitworth actually been working on the Thames and Severn Canal, which we've covered many times here in West Country Wanderings, haven't we? They were working with John Rennie on the route, but it was somebody else. Rennie's understudy, one William Smith, who was become famous in his own right, who grew up in this area, who got the route going through. He was later to be known as the father of geology, Stratus Smith in fact, but because of his expertise in rock, they decided to go with him and his route through this part of North East Somerset. But that's not the full story. William Smith, in fact, embarked himself on a 900 mile journey, should I say, covering much of the country, the United Kingdom, looking at other canals that had already been built and speaking to the engineers and the surveyors which had created them. While all this was going on, one Robert Weldon of Shropshire was demonstrating his patented hydrostatic or Kyson device. Now what on earth is all this about? Well, he was really proud of this, and in fact he built a model. And the Somerset Coal Canal decision makers, the committee, travelled up to Shropshire from here in Somerset to go and have a look at it. And they were very, very impressed with what Weldon had come up with. The committee was so impressed they decided to use, in this area here, a Kyson lock. But what on earth is a Kyson? We've seen Kyson House, or rather the entrance to it, and Kyson Meadow, so we know it was built in that area. However, sadly there are no remains of it whatsoever, although I don't think full investigations and digs have been done to see what can be uncovered. A little bit was taken place in the 1960s by the Bath Archaeological Society, and I've got some notes on that. Now unfortunately you're going to have a lot of imagination with you now before I tell you how a Kyson works, because I can't show you. Now when we're describing locks, it's much easier to show you a lock, to show you what it looks like and how it works, rather than just to tell you how it works, because it's much easier to see it in practice with a narrowboat or barge going into a lock and the water going up and down and the gates opening and all that, it's much harder to envisage what a caisson device looked like and how it worked back in those days, but I'll attempt to do so. Now, if you can imagine that I'm not here by the Somerset Coal Canal now, I'm right back where I was earlier at Caisson House. And we had a device there, and you've got the canal effectively on two levels because of the contour of the land. The lower one that we said is coming along from Dundas, and we need to get it up to the higher one. And what you have is a cylindrical device that anything going on the canal that was carrying coal or stone or passengers needs to go into. So it's going into this wooden sealed chamber. Now this sealed chamber effectively floats in water, and the water carries the caisson upwards or downwards to effectively lower it or raise it between the two levels. I'll try and include some diagrams that I found in a very old book, and they give you some indication of what it may have looked like, although because photography hadn't yet been invented and there weren't any artists that decided to do drawings of it, we really don't know exactly. But how exactly did it work? Now you may be thinking this is something to do with our caisson. Remember I said there were no remains. Well, this is nothing to do with our caisson. This is the remains of what was a large pumping engine. Why did you need a pumping engine? Well, it's to do with water. Often, look on the Cotswold canals at Thames Head, there was a large pumping station there. That one actually came up from around Liskeard area in Cornwall. And this one here was put in around 1820 to provide a source of water into the canal. In fact, later on though, it was moved further down the canal in the direction of Dunkerton. It's quite difficult to make out exactly what is going on in this area because so many things have changed since the Somerset Coal Canal closed. But there is like a horseshoe effect, and it later became locks. But before it came locks, we had our caisson, and I'll come back to that story again now. Going back to our caisson though, it was much celebrated technology at the time. This is really cutting edge stuff. Now the famous novelist Jane Austen, who resided for quite a few years in Bath, although I don't think she actually liked Bath, she really didn't enjoy the high society over there. She walked probably the same route that I did today. Well, I'm not sure whether she took a bus or not. It was probably some horse and carriage that took her up to the top of the hill, and she walked to here to have a look at the caisson for herself. I'm going to just read you some notes that were written around the time to explain to people exactly how the caisson worked. But I will refer to them because I can't remember all of the words in one go. It consists of a trunk or a caisson made of wood and of dimensions equal to receive a vessel. That's a canal going vessel. At each end there is a doorway which the boat is to be floated through. So you've got a barge, the vessel carrying the stone or coal going into this wooden container called a caisson, which is water sealed. The door is shut, closed, tightly closed, so it's got water inside it as well. With a given quantity of water, and that's a really important point, a given quantity of water, the amount of water counterpoises the caisson, which makes it have a same specific gravity with the water into which it is immersed. So it's very, very precise, the amount of water that's in the caisson counterpoised with the weight of the vessel and what it's carrying together with the specific gravity of the water that it's going to be in. Yes, that's really, really tricky to understand, but an important concept for how the caisson actually functioned. The caisson can then be raised or lowered by destroying this equilibrium. In other words, if it got more or less than the specific gravity of the water that was in that basin there, then it would go up or down to the upper or lower level. Now, it's difficult to visualise exactly how it is. You're telling me it really is quite difficult. And to use it in practice, it must have been an amazing thing. Oh, I wish they had photography invented in those days so we could have a picture of exactly what it looked like. But alas, we don't. We've only just got those few illustrations and recreations of what it may have looked like. We don't know exactly. We just got descriptions of how it worked. That's all we've got to go on. One thing is sure though, it must have been an absolutely terrifying experience. You just imagine it. You're on a vessel, for example, a narrowboat, tugboat, and you're sat in it. You're on the canal, and then you're going into this wooden vessel and you're closing the door, which is effectively, because it's watertight, that also means it's airtight. So you've only got a very specific period of time before you need to get out the other side of it again. So it's watertight, it's airtight. There's going to be no light in there because you've completely sealed it, and then you're going to be suspended in some other water, and then you're going to be lifted up or lowered down. That's absolutely, truly terrifying. But people did it, as the following explains. Well, I must admit, I didn't actually think I'd be sitting inside one of the locks on the Somerset Coal Canal today. This is really, really exciting. We're now on the lower level. Remember I mentioned about the 2 levels and the caisson that linked the 2. And we were up there where the engine was pumping the water. This is the lower one, and yes, wonderful. I'm not sure what number this is. There was 22 locks around Combe Hay, and they form a very, very tight horseshoe. In fact, I think it's called the Bull's Nose. If you have a look at the map, you probably see why it got that name. Very, very tight curve. It makes its way across the top. We'll be following it around as we follow the Coal Canal Way in a bit. But I just want to continue our story. You're probably thinking, why? If we had caissons, do we have these locks as well? Well, therein lies a tale. Now, remember I said that there's no photography. Photography was invented in the 1830s, 40s, when it was later developed, partly in neighbouring Wiltshire at Laycock, wasn't it? That's the one, Laycock Abbey there, Fox Talbot and all of that stuff. But yeah, so no photography, so no photos of the caissons. But we do have a great report, and it comes from the Bath Herald on the May the 4th, 1799. On Saturday last, according to our advertisement, another trial of the caisson at Combe Hay took place. It's impossible to describe the regularity and ease with which this immense body performed its various evolutions. For more than 4 hours it was successfully sunk and raised again, at one time taking a boat of stones, on another a small boat full of gentlemen and ladies. Well, that must have been, as I say, absolutely terrifying. More than 60 persons descended and ascended at different times from the upper to the lower level, which would have been a bit further along the canal from here. 400 or 500 persons were present on the occasion and testified their unbound admiration by repeated cheers and plaudits. Wow, that's quite a report there from the Bath Herald in 1799, giving you a concept of how it must have been. As I can say, it was much celebrated with the new technology, but to have 400 or 500 people come here in this very remote valley here at Combe Hay, it's quite something. And those brave ladies and gentlemen that decided they would take upon themselves to enter the caisson as it went up and down the 2 levels of the canal. Now, unfortunately, Weldon's optimism was unfounded. The caisson lock and the device became untrustworthy, and that it kept breaking down. In fact, there are a couple of reports that people did actually get stuck in it, although thankfully they were rescued before the whole thing ran out of air. Weldon became rather depressed, and I have read that he may have taken his own life, but he certainly slunk away, probably back to Shropshire area, because his brilliant invention, the caisson, could not be developed and was soon taken out of use, thus making communications between the upper and lower level here on the Somerset Coal Canal largely redundant. So the Somerset Coal Canal had a problem how to link up the 2 levels. So rather than going straight into building locks, one of which you see here, they decided to go on an entirely different tact. Well, isn't this a magnificent sight here at Combe Hay? This wonderful lock here. Of course, we're still not talking about locks, are we? Because we've got our trouble with our caissons. So I'm having to watch where I am. There's a big drop down there, and I certainly don't want to slip up if one of these coping slabs above the lock are loose. Still on the edge of engine wood, that's the limestone link footpath over there. So what happened? Why did we have to resort to these? And what happened in between? Because we didn't go straight to the locks here on the Somerset Coal Canal. After the failure of the caisson, several other things were looked at. Norton and Whitmore proposed a geometrical lock. James Fussell, who actually worked on the Dorset and Somerset Canal, particularly around the area of Mells, a bit further to the south of here, near the town of Frome, somewhere we will have a look at later in the canal series here, he proposed a balanced lock, but it was to another innovation that they decided to go to, and that was Dodd and Outram's inclined plane. Now, of course, inclined planes have been used many other places, certainly been used for a long time in the Coldbrook-Darrell area again, back in Ironbridge in Shropshire. But they decided to use a slightly different variation of it here on the Somerset Coal Canal. It was Dodd's design that won the day. He had balanced cylindrical wheels at the top and the bottom of the plane, with a continuous chain which slowed down the descent of the wagons coming from the upper level to the lower level of the canal here on the Somerset Coal Canal. But again, that didn't succeed completely, because again there were problems with it, with lots of problems with unreliability. And it wasn't until 1810 that a permanent solution was found. Now, one John Sutcliffe in April of 1800 wrote to the committee of the Somerset Coal Canal and said that the locks would be the best way to get over the problem of the two levels of the canal. However, it wasn't to be until 1802 that the financial willpower was there to enable the locks to be constructed. Some 22 locks in a huge horseshoe right through here at Engine Wood at Combe Hay. Very impressive site. And some of the locks that survived, some of them are in private land, as we saw at Rowley Farm down there. So I'm not going to enter that bit. You can see one a bit from the public highway though. And there's ones dotted through the wood, which you can of course see. It's absolutely fantastic, and I thoroughly recommend, if you're interested in canal history, that you have a look for yourselves if you're ever in this area. One thing though is that Combe Hay is very, very difficult for parking. The roads here, very, very narrow, so I strongly recommend you did what I did, come into Bath, ideally via public transport, and then get a bus out to the Park and Ride at Old Down and then walk in that way, which is what I did here today. But yeah, it's wonderful to see all of this history. Before we go on the next bit of our story, you can see here the grooves and the limestone coping on the top of the lock, where the lock gates would have opened and closed. There's like a 45-degree angle of movement you can see, and on the opposite side there you can see rope marks on the parapet stones, limestone there, where it would have been pulled by horses and the ropes digging into the limestone itself. So we have three different types of technology in use here. The incredible caisson, which sadly ultimately was a failure. Would have been terrifying to go on it though. But of course, if it was just stone or coal on the vessel and nobody was inside it, probably a lot less so. But it was just a shame it never actually worked, because it was a very ingenious and highly technological method of gaining something to move between two levels of contour of the land. You then had the inclined plane, which was used elsewhere. Sadly, no trace of that survives either. And the magnificent 22 locks here, most of which still survive. Some of them have actually been restored in private ownership back at the Rowley Farm area, but please don't trespass in their land there. But you can see others throughout Engine Wood here, just off the footpath, a limestone link. There is still much else to tell you about the Somerset Coal Canal, far more that I can fit in to another video, so that will remain for another day. We've got the story of the railway, the story of the other inclined planes and the tramways that are in this area as well as other locks and tunnels, including one back there in Combe Hay itself, although that is now blocked up. But I'm going to make my way back that way, see if I can see any evidence of it at all, and if I do, I'll include some photographs of it at the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed it today. One of my canal series here on West Country Wanderings. Until next time, take care of yourselves. All the best for now. Bye bye.